got music in the back and champagne over here and little cakes. Well, maybe not all of that, but we might have it. So just think of us having a party. I am here to talk about a book besides my own. I have been on the road talking about this book quite a bit, and I'm happy to talk about A Life on Fire because I believe Kate Barnard is the most important woman in state history. And if she is, why haven't more of us heard of her? That's the question, and that's what I set out to try to talk about and prove in this book. And I wrote it, it took 40 years from the time I started it to finishing it last year, because Dr. Angie DeBow, who was a dear friend of mine, admired Kate and asked me to write the book. So I did. A promise kept, finally. Here comes trouble.
Problems of technology. Thanks, everyone. Let's see. You are not muted. It's picking up my audio. We should be good. I would say let's keep going.
Keep going, okay. So I was asked to review this book, The Brilliant Life of Eudora Welty, which says on the cover, USA bestseller. And it is, if you read in the description about this book, an 85-year-old woman who lives alone, who has decided she's tired of life and wants to end life, and contacts a Swiss hospital for hospice to make that happen, for self-euthanization. And I thought, why did they ask me to review this book? I am older. I do live alone. I am nowhere near ready to end my life. And I thought, well, it's a novel, and it talks about older protagonists. It talks about the issues of death and dying, which we know we should all talk about. We should all eat 8 servings of fruit and vegetables every day, but we don't do that all the time. Americans, I think, have a reluctance to talk about end of life and death. Now, at Trinity Episcopal Church, where I went, Father Jack Powers, if you knew him, once gave a wonderful Sunday school program about death and dying, and he admonished us as Episcopalians to use those words, realistic words, death, dying, end of life, not passed over, not sleeping in the bosom of Jesus, not euphemisms. And he said, death is a part of life. We have no memory of anything before we were born. And of course, we don't know anything about when we die after that, but to accept it as part of the great mystery of life and the universe. I have a friend, Kelly Scott, who runs Clare House, which is an end-of-life facility. She's a nurse, and she tells me it is a great privilege to be with somebody at their death, and said, you should remember, you should know, you should think about, we all should think about who will be at our deathbed. So I go back to that fruit and vegetable thing. I know I ought to do it, but I'm not. So The Brilliant Life of Eudora Welty, of Eudora Honeysett. Eudora Welty was quite a different character. I heard her when she spoke here at the library. Did any of you hear her? She was wonderful. And somebody asked her a question from the audience. Miss Welty, they said, here's a passage from your book. I don't understand what it means. And they read it, and it was very convoluted. And she said, what could I have been thinking? Next question. That's what I like about old dames. Just go on through life. So this book is told in the present of Miss Honeysett thinking about ending her life. And it's told in flashbacks that bring us up to date of the life she's had. And I'm going to give away a lot of the plot of this book because I didn't particularly like this book. I didn't think it was particularly well written. So I don't think I'll spoil it for you. But this book started in World War II. She's a little girl. Her father is getting ready to go to the war. We can see this coming. He's killed in the war. Her mother is pregnant at the time, has a little girl, little sister, who is problematic from the time she's born. The mother falls into deep depression. Eudora stays at home to sort of mediate between them. And this is told in bits and pieces. We don't get it all at once. She finally meets somebody who asks her to marry him. The young sister steals her bow on her wedding day. The sister dies. The mother stays on depressed. I mean, this just goes like this. I think of like a long brown life. Stays in the house where she was born all of her life, same job. And now she's ready to end it. And you think, well, I don't blame her. Look at that, girl. So what happens, what this book is about, is a bright, shiny little girl named Rose moves in next door, wears bright, colorful costumes, and is insistent on getting Miss Honeysett back in life. She gets her to go out to eat ice cream. She gets her to go to a senior living facility just to meet people. And Eudora is resisting this all along. The family gets involved with her life. They arrange for national health care to come visit her almost daily as her health declines so that she can die happily at home with people who love her. Now, if that isn't fiction, I don't know what is. I wish that would happen to me, that a little girl would come rescue me. I know there are sad stories that are classics. Anna Karenina, Farewell to Arms. These are stories that didn't have great happy endings, but they were written so well. And that's one of the things. This is a very plain book, and it must be very popular because it's a bestseller. I think it must be an allegory, like the Zen philosophy. If we step out into life, life steps forward to meet us. Maybe that's what it's telling us. And it does have some truths in it that I admired. Here's one. I'm reading excerpts from the book. When Eudora goes to this senior citizen social, she thinks, it's such a nuisance that elderly people have to look so old. This shrunken prune-like appearance, as if we're slowly deflating. It's most unprepossessing. Eudora had no great desire to sit with these people, to effectively stare into a mirror at a constant reminder that she's become old, and yet here she is. So now think about that. There's a woman sitting there thinking that at a social. You're not likely to go up to her and say, hey, let's get acquainted and go out for ice cream. She meets a widow there who has this wisdom. And I think this is very good. The widow says, there's a great comfort in kindness. I value it above almost everything else these days. I used to think it was silly when people said life was short, but I completely get that now. The least we could do is to be kind to people around us, and humans seem to forget that so easily. And I think after this pandemic, when we've all been burrowing at home, have lost a lot of our social skills and a lot of our kindnesses. I don't even know how to have a conversation with people anymore. So we need to redevelop our social skills, I think, and remember about kindness. So the book tells us Eudora comes to this realization. She stands back, this is from the book, and appraises what is left of her life. And it doesn't look like much. But then what are humans when we come down to it? We arrive with nothing, we accumulate far too much, and we leave with nothing. So see, that is a wisdom, that is a truth. We all know that. And one of the employees at the Swiss facility, while Eudora is still trying to make this decision, tells her this: allow yourself to choose life while you're making this decision about your death. It's important to live life to the full while you can. Now, these are things we all know, and it's good that this book reminds us. And I thought, in my own life, how different that is. A little girl did move in, not next to me, but down the street. And I wrote about her. I wrote about her in this Tulsa People column from last month, and there's a copy over here called Time Will Come Good. And I'm going to read you just part of it. Last summer, a little girl named Frances came visiting from down the street. She had a caterpillar in her hand. She knows everything about caterpillars. And now, thanks to Frances, I know quite a bit about them myself. We searched my garden for more caterpillars, or maybe even a butterfly, but we found none, and this was a great disappointment to Frances. She left me with clear instructions. If I find a caterpillar, put it in a jar with 3 leaves of lettuce and call her, and she'll be down as fast as she can. And she knows a lot about fast because Frances runs up and down the street on her with a little brother or with a friend. And if she's not going fast enough, she rides her bicycle up and down the street. And then just overcome with being Frances and 9 years old and speed and joy, she will lift her head back and go, ah! I think that's wonderful. So Frances came into my life. Then after summer, she decided we would write poetry together. And we did. She wrote a poem and left it in my mailbox. I wrote one and left it in the mailbox. But then school started and she had violin lessons and Frances drifted away a little bit, but I thought she'll be back this summer. We'll look for caterpillars. But now I see a for sale sign has gone up by her house. So that's the difference in Eudora Honeysett and me. Rose stays in her life. Frances comes into my life, teaches me about caterpillars, and moves on. But I thought, and what part of this column is about poetry and Irish poetry, because I thought even after Frances moves on, I still have poetry and we still have books. And one of the poems that I came across the other day is by Barbara Hamby, and it's titled, I Beseech Thee, O Yellow Pages. And it starts this way. I beseech thee, O Yellow Pages, help me find a number for Barbara Stanwyck, because I need a tough broad in my corner right now. She'll pour me a tumbler of scotch and gin and tell me to buck up. I love that little poem, and I wish I had Barbara here to pour me a shot. So the other poems I quote in this are Irish poets, and one is by John O'Donoghue, and he says this. When the weather was bad, and when this came out, we were having that blizzard, that one-day blizzard. And I remembered last February, tried to kill us, tried to freeze us to death. Well, John O'Donoghue says this, not just about the weather, but about emotional weather, I think. This is the time to be slow, to lie low to the wall until the bitter weather passes. This is the line I love. Time will come good again. I like that. And to remember that. And it made me think of a little movie, Enchanted April. That about the women who go off together to have a holiday in Italy. And the oldest woman, Joan Plowright, is the actress, says, no, she won't go take a walk in the sun. She says, I will sit here in the shade and remember better times and better men. I like that. So, what I want to talk to you today about is 2 other books, 2 what I think better books. And they're both about older people, and they both happen to be Irish, which is appropriate. We just passed St. Patrick's Day. This is a book with a title I don't much like, but it's called This is Happiness by Neil Williams. I love this book. He and his wife, he's an award-winning author, he and his wife live in County Clare in Ireland, moved there, quit their jobs in the United States, moved there to spend their days gardening and writing, which sounds idyllic, doesn't it? Until you realize that it rains every day in County Clare, and in the winter they have 3 hours of sunshine. So even I would scuttle back to Oklahoma after that. The story is told, it's a novel, and it's told by a man named Noel Crow. And when he begins this book, he tells us he is 78 years old, looking back at his life in this little village in Ireland. when he had been 17 and dropped out of seminary in Dublin and moved back to the village to live with his grandparents so they could all try to figure out what to do with him. It's on the west coast of Ireland. It's a village that hasn't changed in hundreds of years. And it rains every day. But I'm going to read just the opening of this because you can get a sense of his, it's a simple literary device of list making, but you get a sense of his lyricism and the way he uses the language. The name of the village is Faha. Nobody in Faha could remember when it started. Rain there on the western seaboard was a condition of living. It came straight down and sideways, frontways, backwards, and any other words God could think of. It came in sweeps, in waves, sometimes in veils. It came dressed as drizzle, as mizzle, as mist, as showers, frequent and widespread, as a wet fog, as a damp day, a drop, a dreeping, and an out-and-out downpour. It came the fine day, the bright day, and the day promised dry. It came at any time of the day and night and in all seasons, regardless of calendar, regardless of forecast, until in Faha, your clothes were rain and your skin was rain and your house was rain with a fireplace. This tells us exactly where he's living, farming his life. So 3 things are about to happen in this little village. One is it stops raining. And it takes them a while to realize this because it's such a part of the life. The second thing is young Noel falls in love from afar with a village girl who barely knows he exists. The third thing is an older man named Christy arrives. And he's there because electricity is coming to the village. And Christy is in charge of signing people up to get it hooked to their house. But he's also, we learn, secretly come to find a lost love, a maiden he left behind some 50 years ago. And the mystery is, will he find her? Will she accept him? When the book starts, it starts in Holy Week, which is timely for us now. Holy Week in St. Celia's. And he says this, the author says this. And I'm going to read this excerpt because it tells us, not the weather, this is going to tell us all about the village and the villagers. Someone has said that religion lasts longer in Ireland because we're such an imaginative people, we can vividly picture the fires of hell. That Holy Week, St. Celia's was dressed in flowers, and the ceremony and the ritual had its own liveliness. So these are the people. There is, of course, I love this description, Sam Craig, whose clock ran slow, both in fact and metaphor. Like those in the Ark, there was an unwritten order to how the parishioners came into St. Celia's and where they sat, because they were the same people week in, week out. You could close your eyes and know that Matthew Madigan didn't enter, but for some reason stood just outside the door in the rain. That Mary Falsley was at the very front of the women's aisle with her husband Pat sniffling with a permanent head cold at the back of the men's. You know that Mrs. Pender, who kept the cleanest house in the parish, was there, but not her husband Tom, and she wouldn't come until she knew he was in the other place. Behind him were the Marahis, who all took the road to ruin and made a few stops along the way. There were the Morrises, each born in April, 9 months apart after haymaking, and each with something of the summer in their nature. And down the aisle on the left were the Liddies, Bridget and Jerome, and 10 children. Near enough to them, the Clancys, whose childhoods tasted of tears. And behind them, Nick Boylan, who suffered from an incurable affection called Maureen. The Collins, the Kings, the Divots, the Davids, the Dooleys. Johnny Mack had a kind of ugliness irresisted to Hardy. Thomas Deanan, a fine fiddle player. And in fact, the Deanans were all that mystical thing, a musical family. Any one of them could pick up an instrument and draw a tune from it. And while all the men were unhatted, all the women had their head covered, a throwback maybe to Bathsheba. And Mrs. Sexton wore the most outlandish hats, a kind of artificial hill of flowers, complete with tiny green hummingbirds. Well, you hear the lilt to his language, and we just see these people. They made me think of people at Trinity. We sat the same place every day. The people wore the same hats. So I love this book so much for what it tells us about the older generation, nurturing the younger generation, the Irish village, resistance to change with the electricity, who would take it, who wouldn't. It's a fine, thick book, as the Irish might say, and charming. So that's a novel. But the nonfiction I just discovered at the library is this. I don't like this title either, To Speak for the Trees. But the subtitle is what's important. My Life's Journey from Ancient Celtic Wisdom to a Healing Vision of the Forest by Diana Beresford Kroger. And it's her memoir. She is recognized worldwide now as a botanist and medical biochemist who has come up with a revolutionary understanding about trees in the forest and how they communicate with one another and other plants in the forest and how they can communicate with us, which sounds outlandish. But if you remember the book, The Overstory by Robert Powers, one of the characters is based on her. But this is her memoir, her story. Now, I'm going to read just a tiny bit of the introduction because it's a plainer style than This Is Happiness. But it's like right from the heart to the reader. She says, I've always found it difficult to think about the story of my life, let alone tell it, because I suffered great trauma as a child. To protect myself, I took my pain and put it down in a deep well in my mind. I hid it from myself so that I could function, and I moved forward my entire scientific career and education, decades of research, with my eyes always cast ahead. The next question, the next answer, the next piece of understanding and wisdom. She's very successful. She said, but the person I am today could not exist without that trauma. It led me as a 13-year-old girl on stepping stones to one of the last bastions of Celtic culture in Ireland, a place called the Lisheen's Valley in County Cork. I arrived in Lisheen in need of something to help me hold me together, just as the place itself was falling apart. The ancient knowledge of the Druids, kept safe, refined, and handed down from one generation to the next for millennia, was on the verge of being lost. Instead, it was given to me, an understanding of the healing powers of plants and the sacred nature of the natural world that remains the greatest gift I have ever received. So in telling the story of my life and the leaves, roots, trunks, bark, and stems that all weave through it, I hope to stir that memory. I want to remind you that the forest is far more than a source of timber. It is our collective medicine cabinet. It is our lungs. It is the regulatory system for our climate and our oceans. It is the mantle for our planet. It is the health and well-being of our children and our grandchildren. It is our sacred home. It is our salvation. So what happened to Diana is this. Her father was an English aristocrat who married an Irish pretty Irish woman. His parents didn't approve of the marriage. Well, when she was about 13, her father died, and then her mother was killed in a car accident. Here she is, an orphan in Ireland, because the English family won't have her. There's a little money left aside for her from her mother's estate, but they won't take her in. Now, according to Irish law, she had to go before a magistrate, and because she was an Irish orphan, she was destined to be sent to the laundries. You know, we've read about the Irish laundries for orphans, especially for unmarried girls. But it was a big dilemma for him because she had this aristocratic name, Beresford, and he didn't want to be the one to put an English aristocrat's daughter in the laundry. So she was allowed to go live with an uncle and go to school. And in the summers, she went back to the Lechines Valley with a great aunt and uncle. And there, this is what is just mysterious to me. They looked at her and said, because of her heritage, her grandparents were very important people in that historic place of Ireland. She was entitled to know the mysteries of the land and the forests and the plants. And they began teaching her. All of the old women took her in, and they would take her to the forest or a ditch or a field and pull a plant and say, here's this plant, smell it. You'll never forget this smell. See what it looks like. Here's what it does. Here's how it heals. And they passed this Celtic wisdom to her. Now, back in school, she is the top of her class all the way through college. And she studies, or did I just say, biochemistry. I mean, she's incredible. She's very interested in plants. Now, this is how it comes together, how her two stories come together. The little girl and the scientist. One of the most memorable events of her summer was on a holiday called, not a holiday exactly, but a day of celebration called Baltain, which is the equivalent of May Day, May 1st, but usually the first day of May. Women of the village gather outside at an old stone altar to wait for sun to come up. And on the day, the people celebrated all that was coming into life through the fire of the sun, all of womanhood. The shamrock was just coming up in the pasture. Trifolium dubium, the flowering clover that creeps among the pasture lands all over Ireland. It's been used as a fallow crop by Irish farmers since the construction of Rome. Just after the fire lands on the altar, the shamrocks begin to break out of their winter dormancy and push out their green fingers into spring. And in front of the altar, little Diana and the women knelt in the grass, waited for the sun. And then they all practiced a controlled meditation, breathing rhythmically together, deep, slow rhythms of breath. And then she saw that all the women were bending to wipe the morning dew from the fresh leaves of the shamrock. And her great aunt says, now it's known, Diana, great beauty does not go unnoticed, so let's not dawdle. And then wetting their hands with the plant, with a pattern, they put the dew on their face with a special attention to the corners of their eyes. Now, I've read about this before, that on May Day, women would gather the dew of the flower for the beauty. Well, later in her life, when she was a scientist, Diana examined the clover and confirmed that Trifolium dubium does indeed contain a biochemical for beauty. The upper area of the shamrock leaf exudes a pair of related flavonoids called hesperindin and hesperin-10. The morning dew holds these beneficial chemicals in a solution, and when applied to the face, they encourage blood flow while gently tightening the skin surface. She called it nature's anti-aging cream. And it also improves peripheral vision by increasing oxygenation of the eye. So she connects the wisdom of these Celtic women to science today and weaves this through her whole life story as she comes to celebrate the importance, where she lives in Canada now, of the forest and of trees, where she is replanting a forest of her own of trees to endure that climate. Because she noticed, she's researched how much of the forests of the world are being cut down. What that does, her concern with climate control, climate change, is the oxygenation, I can't even say, the oxygen in the air from the trees, and said, every person on the earth needs to plant 6 trees to make up for the ones we've lost. I was consumed with guilt because I had just let public service cut down 3 trees in my yard. Where can I plant more trees? And she said, not everybody can plant a tree, but for the good of the earth, for the good of all of us, plant 1 tree or at least a pot of mint out on the balcony and celebrate the nature around us and the trees, and celebrate what's called Beltane, the Day of Womanhood, first day of May. Those are the books I want to talk about. Thank you for listening. And do you have questions? Oh, I have a shamrock plant. I can't wait for May to come, set it outside and rub it all over my face and see what happens. I hope to look better next time I see you. Thank you for being here. Let's see what time it is. What time is it? Can someone see the clock? 10. We know everything we need to know. Oh, yes. This one? This is happiness. Oh, and there's a list over here with it. I recommend it over Eudora Honeysett. So there's a list with that book and To Speak for Trees, both on that list. And I highly recommend A Life on Fire. Thank you. Let us all keep reading and supporting our library.
Thank you, Connie. We enjoyed that. Thank you all for attending today. Next week, we will have our 4th session, which is the book of The Rose Code by Kate Wynn. And we're trying something different. Sonia Wallace will be with us initially and talk about the book. And then Kate Wynn will be joining us via Zoom. So a little bit something different in the Book Sandwiched In program. Thank you again. Have a lovely day.